We'll start with that. Do we have mics for the audience? Great. Do you want to, luck of the draw, pick somebody? Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi there.
Oh, I think we need a mic up. I don't think it's live.
Is it up? There we go. I Colorado native as well, so I've very much seen, the trajectory of business here changed. My whole career trajectory has been here. As I've come from my own startup background, what I've noticed is that as the companies start to become successful, everyone's going outside then to get kind of their third-party support, or whether it's getting, you're big enough now to get IT services or, marketing services or whatever it is, you get more and more pressure to go outside Denver. So, Mark, I wanted to take you a little bit to task of, your comment on how do you keep these Denver-born companies, how do you keep the community and the services and the business that you guys then entail higher back? How do you keep it all going in Colorado?
Yeah, so the thing, like you're saying, for third-party support and things like that, or talent, or both? For both. Third-party support. Yeah. So, we have to be honest with ourselves. So we have a consumer-facing business, and the reality is there aren't a lot of really big, successful consumer brand companies based in Colorado relative to a lot of other markets. I grew up among other cities in Atlanta for a little bit. Atlanta's got a ton of media and consumer-facing businesses, CPG and stuff like that. Chicago does. New York has all this other stuff. So there are really good agencies and from let's say a marketing, digital design, things like that. There's a lot of really good agencies. We work with them. But at a certain level of scale, you then go, okay, now we need media buying in 16 cities, and some of the places in Colorado can't do it. So I actually, I'd love to keep it here, but if they don't exist, they don't exist. The flip side is when there are things that are localized, so we do AV things, right? We have events we host and do our all hands and bring in an AV firm. And we do some of those outside of Colorado as well. There's a local company who's we can travel. And so we engage with them, and we bring them, we say, hey, we want you to be our one, because that's something that we found the talent is good here. So I actually think the ecosystem development will happen over time. What I hope is that as we continue to grow, and as we build a large, successful consumer-facing brand, over time, in 5-10 years, there will be people from our marketing team who have gotten to be so good, and then our local talent that maybe is in shorter supply here. And so that's the development of the ecosystem. That's actually part of what Endeavor's mission is, to sort of create that multiplier effect. So that's one way that we try to do it. The other is, to the extent that it doesn't really matter, meaning hey, if you need IT support, right, and that can be done in a distributed fashion, and the difference between this company that's local that can still support you and that company that's in New York that can support you as well, maybe the one in New York's a little better because they work with slightly more scaled companies. But the reality is, is it going to make that much of a difference? Then we actually just take the stance of let's just support the local company. But that's a business/personal decision. We just have decided to do so. I actually wouldn't put that imperative on people and say you must or should do this. It's just we've made that decision. We want to create this ecosystem here.
I'll just add one point. So I look at it through the lens of my job is to grow the business and impact lives and live our mission and create shareholder value along the way. And that decision might involve my utilizing a development team in India, for example, versus one here. Well, what that does is allows me to be successful because they're lower cost and they're talented. Therefore, the business continues to grow, and ultimately that will lead to my hiring more people here where we're located and headquartered in Denver. So I think there's an effect that we have to do what's best for the business along the way, but ultimately it leads to growth in Colorado. And to Mark's point, then you build the infrastructure and it continues to succeed.
Next question.
Hi. How many hours a week are you guys putting in, and what schedule have you found to be the most efficient?
That's actually a great
12.
question. 12 hours a week.
12 hours a week. That's it for me.
John, I know for a
good to
fact
be
that's not
John.
true. I have worked with your scheduling team.
I never think of it that way, but I can tell you my personal take on work-life balance is it didn't happen in my case. But the good news is I really like what I do, so I don't feel like I'm stealing from other things. My kids are grown, and so it's easier in that respect. But there is one thing I make sure I do every week, and that is I take a block of time, usually on Tuesdays, where I don't work on the business and I just think. And I make sure I decouple and do everything but PAX 8 stuff, because I find that if you just keep yourself out there immersed, that's a lot of reason I do this stuff, is it gives you, you get these sort of random ideas that you wouldn't have necessarily thought of, because it's so easy to grind on your own stuff. And the best way to really be open to the universe and seeing more is to really decouple. But I don't think there's an optimal. I think it's your own work style. I can't tell you you should put in 60 hours a week. I think I'm really erratic. There's weeks when I work like crazy hours, and there's weeks that I'm not going to work that much.
Chris, I've heard you walk on a treadmill while you're taking phone calls, so tell us about your week.
I do. I walk on the treadmill. I walk outside. I try to take one-on-one meetings while I'm walking so I can get some exercise, and it helps clear my mind. I do it all winter long, too. I think it's just really effective for me personally.
Fantastic. I do that sometimes.
Yeah,
too. Not enough. I'm always happy when I do.
Every one-to-one meeting, I'm walking somewhere. But look, one thing I'd say to this, to your question is, I'm very intentional about how I spend my time. So I've got small kids. I've got 14, 12, and 9 at home, and I love my family, and I want to spend as much time with them. But I'm an entrepreneur, and it's going to take those 60, 70, 8 hours a week. So I count how many nights a week I stay away from home. And if I've exceeded my monthly limit, I'll say no to a trip. Right? And so I think you just have to be really disciplined in terms of how you approach it. And then that works for my family, as they know they're the top priority, and I'm going to spend as much time with them as I can. But keeping track of that data is critical for me.
Interesting. Mark?
I mean, to the question of how many hours, I don't know, because I sort of John's point. I like what I do so much that it just doesn't feel like work all the time. Sometimes it does, but.
Do you count a dinner with your clients that you're having fun?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Is that work hours?
Yeah. Like
this is what I struggle with. That didn't seem like work.
Is my exec team offsite? Is that work? I guess technically it is, but it's like so much fun that it doesn't feel that way. So as a board member meeting, Kent Theory is one of my board members. So we get together, for a few hours at least every month, and or Eric Rosa, both are Endeavor entrepreneurs who happen to be board members of mine. Eric and I, we go for a hike whenever we're doing a one-on-one, right? And so it's work. I'm like, a CEO's meeting with his board member. That's work, I guess, but it certainly doesn't feel that way. So I also have 3 kids, and we were talking roughly the same age. So I have a 14-year-old, 12-year-old, and 11-year-old. And 50% of the time I'm a single dad. So I'm able to it's interesting. On one hand, it's very hard. In other ways, it's very easy, because I can segregate my life into week on, week off. So today, I have the kids this week, and I'll be going to dinner with my board member after the happy hour thing after this, and then I have somebody who's watching the kids a little bit. But I said no, to your point. I said no to the activities on Monday and Tuesday in the evening, because I'm going to be there for my kids, help with the homework, all that sort of stuff, versus the weeks when I'm not there. Then I can stuff travel into those weeks, and I can do that sort of stuff. So I think it's just everybody has to have a personal kind of a personal mandate of what's important to them. And as a CEO, you have to recognize, and as an entrepreneur especially, you have to recognize you're going to sacrifice things. You're going to disappoint people. You're going to say no to people. There's going to be a whole bunch of people who are going to be unhappy with you at any given point in time. Hopefully it's not your family members that often. It's going to be employees. Hopefully it's not your investors that often too. It's going to be a lot of people. And be comfortable with that. And then, to Chris's point, be intentional about how you spend your time and what your priorities are. One thing I was considering was it's important to recognize why you wanted to be an entrepreneur in the first place. And usually it's because you have this burning desire to fix a problem or start a business that does something in particular, and that's one thing. But it's also usually coupled with like something around freedom or independence or being able to control your destiny or whatever. And so if you end up being a slave to your schedule, if you end up being a slave to sort of the role, then you're kind of like actually not, that whole reason you started the company in the first place, you're not really adhering to what was your initial intention.
I couldn't echo that more. I hear people all the time say, I want to be in control of my life. This is why I want to do it. It's like you just signed up for the worst job of your career because everybody else is controlling you. And you're kind of a slave to what everybody else is. So, yeah, you can't look at it like that. But, I think in my case, I know I was an anti-control freak, so that's what appealed to me. So, but it's still, I'm a slave to everybody else.
I became an entrepreneur because I didn't want a boss, and then I brought on private equity.
Wah, wah. All right, we have time for one last question, and then we're finished. So, this gentleman here with the mic, thank you.
This question is directed at John, but it would be great to get Chris and Mark's take on it too.
Okay.
John, you made a couple of comments that stood out to me. One is getting better at pattern recognition at your old age, and the other one was taking several months to evaluate high growth opportunities. So my question is, what advice could you give us on how to back the right horse, or what advice could you give to entrepreneurs evaluating several different high growth opportunities and how to improve our chances for success?
I really would study the societal macro trends. I mean, it's really, the next great opportunity in tech is IoT. So you start to couple that with other things, but yeah, we did a lot of that. We looked at we were looking at, I just read this in the paper, this was in the summer of 2011. We were looking at LED lighting systems for large municipalities. And we were talking about, at some point, people are going to want to see the stars again, and light pollution is going to be an issue. And the cool thing about LED lighting systems in municipalities is you can shut off the lights. You can get a motion sensor so street lights can turn on when there's actually traffic. But I would start at macro trends and look at sort of things that are happening. I think there's an enormous opportunity. We're going to stop talking about if there's global warming and what we're going to do about it. And if we have these mass migrations coming our way because people are trying to move out of hot areas, seems to me like we ought to get really smart at adapting farming to warmer climates and go down 15 feet. I hear it's pretty cool down there. So I think it's just, that's the piece you really look at. And I do think one of the common mistakes I see from, really first-time entrepreneurs is they just go after what they like. And I think if you know a certain area, what I would suggest, and we do this too, is to look at the whole supply chain in your area of expertise and really find the vein of gold. That's probably the best way to monetize an opportunity in that particular field. So you could take anything and you could look at, there's certain pieces, and again, a lot of people just say, I know how to fix this, but they box themselves into a pretty small game from the get-go, and that's a very common mistake.
Yeah, I would say, echo everything John said and add two things. One, be your own biggest skeptic. Kind of what you were saying, like a lot of first-time entrepreneurs charge into it, and you're like, that's been done, and it failed 3 times over there, and it's sort of really dig and try to understand why. If things failed and the problem still exists, that means there's an opportunity to correct it, but don't make the same mistake somebody else or already made. And so I think that's one piece.
And sometimes it fails because it's just a bad idea.
Sometimes it's a bad idea, and that's where it's like, then how can you change the idea a little bit? Sometimes it's execution. So there's lots of reasons, but it is really be your own skeptic. And then the pattern matching, I think, it can come from that. So if you start saying, okay, there's this nugget of an idea, there's this problem I want to solve, here's this other problem, and maybe I can solve these two things together with one solution, and now let me go find why hasn't this yet been solved? How do I do that? Well, I go talk to people who have the problem, right? I talk to, it's not just a me thing. I have to go do user research, talk to prospective customers, but you don't know what they're even customers of. You just are talking to people who might have the same problem. The process that I went through in founding Sondermind was, I was fortunate that my younger sister was a therapist, my cousin was a clinical psychologist, so I had a network of people to tap into. But I probably talked to, over about an 8-month period, about 40 mental health providers, for about an hour or two each. And then I talked to a lot of medical physicians, and then I talked to people who I knew engaged in therapy and what they didn't like, and really tried to understand, where are the problems and how can I use the experience that I have in the rest of healthcare to solve that.
Chris?
I'll end with my checklist. So when I'm looking at these opportunities, I start with size of the market, and I talk about potential to disrupt, competitive landscape, unit economics, and team, and analyze those in any particular order. But that's a good list that'll give you an idea for what you're going through.
Well, thank you all for being here. John, Mark, Chris, we appreciate you. Thank you, Denver Startup Week, for hosting us. And if you want to learn more about Endeavor and our mission, you can visit endeavor.org. Thank you.